Welcome to the Pansa Pansa Forum. In the Yoruba language, the word pansa is usually injected into poetry to express an uncomfortable, uncensored, and inconvenient truth. The Pansa Pansa Forum is candid conversations about the life of African immigrants in America as it relates to their adaptation to their new home. While some may find it easy to integrate and can balance between retaining the original African culture while accepting the culture of their new home, many continue to struggle to find a balance between both worlds.
Hello and welcome to Pansa Pansa Live. This is a podcast where we discuss the lives of African immigrants and their assimilation into Western society as they raise younger generations in a country that is quite different from their own. We also explore the experiences of children of immigrants as they balance the African and Western cultures. We present to you this informative, interesting, and expansive dialogue about the intricate experiences of African immigrants in America.
Hello, welcome to Pansa Pansa live podcast. I'm your host, Kelechi. Today, I'm having a conversation with Dr. Latifat Cabirou, a psychologist who holds both clinical and academic position in Auburn, University in Alabama. So welcome to Pansa Pansa, Dr. Latif Cabirou. I'm so delighted to have you here today on my platform to share your experience about growing up in America, as well as, your profession as a mental health provider and also as a professor. All those conversations is going to be explored today. And thank you. I really want to tell you that I really appreciate you being here, because it's all part of, bringing knowledge to our community. I really thank you for that. So
thank you for having me.
You were very welcome. As I always ask most of my guests, can you please fully introduce yourself? Talk a little bit about your background to our audience as to where you were born, where you spent most of your childhood and adult life.
Yes. As Ms. Kemi mentioned, my name is Latifat Cabirou. My maiden name is Latifat Adwenwo, so many people know me as Latifat Adwenwo. I was married a few years ago and adopted my husband's last name, hence Cabirou. I'm Nigerian by birth. I was born in Nigeria, lived in Nigeria for 10 years and moved to Chicago shortly after. And I've been in the United States ever since. So a lot of my identity, my values, my cultural upbringing is an intermix of my very early years in Nigeria and growing up in Chicago. And I say Chicago versus the States because I think Nigerians in Chicago have their own distinct cultures, right? So all of that are implicated in who I am today. I currently live in Atlanta. I moved to Atlanta 2 years ago when I got my job offer at Auburn University. And so my university is in Auburn, so I commute from Atlanta to Auburn. Other information, so I attended college at University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, got my bachelor's degree there, and then I got my master's at Benedictine University in clinical psychology in Lisle, Illinois. And I got my doctorate degree and PhD in psychology, in counseling psychology from Loyola University Chicago. And so between Champaign and now, a lot has happened. And so I'm happy to share more about my experience and how all of that has come to be. But a lot has happened over the past 11, 12 years.
Wow. So at what age did you come to the United States?
I was 10.
Oh,
I
wow.
was 10. I was 10. So, I think it was like the right age where you've adopted a lot of those Nigerian values that are instilled upon you when you're young. And, and in the States, a lot of things happen when you're an adolescent. So I think coming to the US at 10 is just like the primary time for one to try to navigate that values and identity space. So, yeah.
Oh, wow. That's really interesting. So how would you compare, the time when you spent in Nigeria and immediately when you came here, trying to adapt to the culture and the society that you were brought into?
I want to preface my response to that by saying, like, a lot of what I study is the cultural experiences of immigrants and the impact on mental health. And so kind of how I understand my experience back then has largely been informed by the kind of work that I do professionally now. Yeah. But I remember back then just not knowing how to make sense of it. I don't know how other people's education in Nigeria was, but for me, I didn't realize that there were other parts of the world. I knew there was Nigeria, I knew there was Africa, but I didn't really know how to make sense of. I didn't really realize there were others that didn't look like us, right? And so upon arriving here, a lot of my adjustment was around like, okay, who are these people? And how do I even make sense of who they are? I remember, there were some students in my class that had like Muslim names, right? And so I originally thought like, oh, they're like me. They must be Nigerian because, you have names like Rashida and, Aliyah, and we were just different. And, it took, a couple of years of just observing and trying to figure like, okay, so when we look alike, we may be Black alike, but like, they're a different kind of Black and I'm a different kind of Black. And that took a lot of getting accustomed to. And, at home, your parents kind of remind you that you are Nigerian, but not really kind of tell you about the others. And so you're like, well, how do I make sense of these other people that I interact with on a regular basis? And, my inquiries about that kind of make that my life's journey, my life's profession. So a lot of what I research, a lot of what I do in my clinical work is trying to help people navigate that adjustment process, getting them to understand who they are and kind of understanding, the life experiences that contributes to who they are.
Yeah, that's very important. And I'm glad that you're able to navigate, and that's what moved you to where you are today. So it's a very challenging, especially at a very young age, coming to this country. Because back in Nigeria too, even though we might understand history, but it's to a certain extent.
Yes.
About
it feels like a foreign object, like, that's that thing over there. It doesn't feel like real.
Yes, so that's what it is. So for our audience who may not know, can you talk a little bit about your childhood growing up in an immigrant home in this country?
I would say that, okay, so I'm one of 4 kids. My older brother is 2 years older than me, and he moved here before we did. When I moved with, my younger siblings. I have a younger sister who's 4 years younger than me, and a brother who is, 9 years younger than me.
Wow.
So we kind of like grew up together in our home, and we lived in Chicago, the north side of Chicago. And, it actually took us a minute to get connected to the Nigerian community in Chicago. I want to say about the first 2-3 years, we were in isolation with just us and our family members. And, my parents are very much of the mindset of like, you stick to family, you don't really branch out of family. So we didn't really connect with all the Nigerians even, right? We were just in our little bubble. I went to elementary school where I had, I think, a couple of Nigerians in my school. But even then it was like, I don't really know you because, we don't interact with other people outside of the family. So a lot of growing up was just trying to figure out like value systems, right? At home, you are expected to do this. And in school, you're expected to do this. One of the things that we found that we often talked about at home is like assertiveness, right? Versus disrespect, right? In school, I'm naturally a quiet person, or I should say was. And so at school, you get a lot of prompts to engage. And I just didn't. Because I see that as being disrespectful or talking out of turn. In Nigeria, there's a lot of emphasis that's placed on being respectful and staying within, appropriate boundaries. And I was very good at that. I know how to follow rules to the T. I'm very obedient. I can do all of that. And, I do that at home. But when you get to school, you get almost kind of like reprimanded for not engaging. It's seen as not being smart, whereas in Nigeria it's the opposite, right? The ones who don't talk are the smartest one. So I spent a lot of time just trying to navigate, okay, so when I'm here, they want me to do this. When I'm here, they want me to do that. And I got it, and I didn't understand it. But in an effort to be obedient, I kind of just like shifted and did whatever the environment required of me. And that was very taxing. I think another key element was, I'm Muslim, and so we got connected to the mosque in our Nigerian community. This our one major mosque. I mean, there are other mosques, but my mosque community in Chicago. That was a space where I, interacted with other Nigerians who were also living in America, and that was a different world too, because it was like, wait, you're Nigerian, but you act like this, and that's allowed. How is that? How is that permissible? How do you get away with this? And so it was a lot of like navigating different settings and trying to understand the rules of each environment, because we didn't talk about them out loud, right? Like you're expected to know it. And for someone who's new to the environment, I didn't know it. So I spent a lot of time just like observing and like studying, and then trying to figure out, okay, what am I supposed to do? Who gets reprimanded for what's allowed? And that's a lot of how I spent my early adolescence. It's just observing.
Yeah. And it's so important what you said, because back home, because of the tradition that parents also brought here, that children, we don't allow back and forth dialogue between a child and the parents, whereby, what is your opinion? How do you feel about this? So a lot of time, many African parents don't know how that impacts their children's academic progress as well, from a very young age all the way to, college, and being successful in life, even all the way to corporate America, and
Absolutely.
I'm so glad that you brought that up, because that is very important. And I see many of our youth who are actually complaining about that. Even also affects even African parents who are here, whereby they are working in a job whereby they just, brush things on the side and say, well, let me just take it. I'm just here to do my job. And they get mistreated, they get, pushed to the side, and they don't even know how to go about advocating for themselves.
You're absolutely right. And I would say it's not just tied to academic achievement. I think more specifically, it's tied to a sense of self. When you're not given the space to fully explore yourself, explore your own thoughts, you don't really understand what you believe. You don't get to think out loud about why you believe what you do.
Yes.
So without an established sense of self, you find yourself in relationships that are not, congruent with who you want to be in a relationship with. You find yourself in jobs that are not satisfactory. You find yourself in places that don't feel like you, because you don't really have a sense of who you are.
Yeah.
When you don't get to explore and think, all those questioning that kids do is an exploration of who I am, what I believe, and what my values are, and why things are the way that they are. When we stunt that for children or adolescents, it basically stunts their growth. It stunts their exploration of who they are.
Yeah. And I'm so happy you bring in this point up, and I know many people who are going to listen to this will find this information very beneficial, because one thing that I see also is it takes a lot of work for parents to sit down and saying that I'm going to listen to my child. I'm going to hear from their perspective of how they think about things, how they feel about things, without me having to defend myself.
Yes.
Because as an African parent, it's also about, let me hear what you have to say. So we listen to respond, not listen to engage, and hear from that child's perspective. Even our body language is very important, when, because I'll give you a small story. My children, we always in dialogue back and forth. And one day my son, he said, they call me Yami, I want to talk to you. I said, okay, say what you have to say. And he looked at my body language and he said, forget it. I said, why are you telling me to forget? I said, I'm sitting here. He said, your body language already told me that you're not
invited.
And so why am I here talking to you when your body language is saying something? So I have to then learn to stay focused and, look at their direction and listen to them. And if I'm not able to listen at that time, I could say, okay, let's talk about it another time. Or if you are angry, I might say, you know what, I think you are hungry right now, and I don't think it's the right time to have this conversation. Maybe we could have it another time.
Oh my God, what you're saying is resonates in so many ways, because when you think about it, when adults, parents talk to their children, they're very attuned to the child's body language, right? If your child is talking to you and they're talking to you like this, you find it disrespectful. If they're sitting like this, if they make a face, we're so attuned to, we don't like it. Yet they do the same thing to the child, and the child is supposed to just accept it as is. And so I love how you brought up the fact that your son looked at you and said, like, you're not ready to be invited to me. Because when it's the other way around, it happens so frequently. And the adults don't think about, what am I given, right?
Yes. Yes, that's so important. This is very powerful. So what would you say are the benefit of growing up in a Nigerian home, in an African immigrant home?
Ooh, okay. So I can't say this without tying this to like what I know professionally, right? I think one of the best benefits is a sense of a solid self-esteem. I think, in everyday conversation, we talk about how Nigerians are the most arrogant, confident, whatever terminology you want to put on it, right? But there's a sense of pride that I can do this, right? You don't know what it is, though. You don't know how to do it yet, but you know that you can because your parents tell you that you can.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know how you're going to figure it out, but you're going to figure it out. And the line message is that I didn't come here for nothing, so you better figure it out. So I think I've adopted and internalized this sense of like whatever is out there that there is to be done, I'll figure it out and I will do it. I remember earlier on telling my mom that I went to study psychology. She's like, there's not a lot of Black people in psychology. So if you want to do it, you have to go all the way to the top. I say, that's what you want? Bet. I got it. And I wasn't sure how I was going to go about it when I, entered undergrad and I was like, I'm studying psychology. I wasn't sure what that meant for me, but the goal was you're gonna be at the top of whatever that is. It's just a matter of how to get there, and of course, making sure it's true to me. But it was like that the top is what's expected of you. There is no glass ceiling, which I think is a huge benefit because a lot of Black and brown kids in the States are raised with the belief that there is a glass ceiling. You can only do so much because of the color of your skin. I think that the way that we are raised, especially this notion that we came here for you to be the best, for you to have the best, so you better make the best of it. I was able to internalize that, and we see that research-wise, that tends to be a huge protective factor for a lot of immigrants. They don't have the messages that they get when they're being raised. I also find that, and this is a lot of, I've had to talk about this a lot over my journey, is just being able to have multiple perspectives. And the mainstream American society is very focused on Western ideas, Western values, American Western values, right? And being raised in a Nigerian home helps you to realize that, there's always more than one way to approach a situation. I think it's very rare that the Nigerian way to do things is similar to the American way to do things. It's very rare. So adopting this notion of that there's always another perspective. And that allows me to be open to new experiences, open to new ways of thinking, open to new ideas. Again, just knowing that there's always something else. There's always another way to do something. I think that will be beneficial to a lot of our older generations to realize that the Nigerian way is not the only way to do it, right? There are people who are in America who are just as successful, just as smart, just as whatever it is you're trying to get to. There are people in America who've done the same thing, and they're not Nigerian, and they were able to figure it out. So that means that there's another way to do it.
Yeah, that's so important for what you just said, because a lot of time we're still stuck with our old ways. And when I talk to even some of the people of my age, whereby, you are in this country, I know Nigeria is not a place where you want to go right now and live. And then you're living a life whereby it's so boring, there's nothing else to do. You just go to the party and come back home. Then, somebody tried to tell you, okay, maybe you could explore other places that might be of interest. It's so difficult to get the people, those are American things. I can't see myself going to the theater. I can't see myself, going to, the park to start dancing with a bunch of people that I don't even know. So different things like that. And we have to get away from that kind of mindset. And like you said, many of our children, we tend to push them to certain fields. You have to be a lawyer, engineer, or a doctor. If you don't go into those fields, that means those kids who didn't go into those fields are less smart or they are less successful. And I've seen parents their parents are medical doctor and they don't want their children to be in medicine. They actually love when their children are in art, and they're making a better living for themselves to explore what their unique talent is all about. So that is very, very important, that from what you were saying. So during your academic career, did you stay on campus or you were going from home? And
I stayed on campus. During my undergrad, I was in Champaign. I live in Chicago. It's a 2-hour drive. So I stayed on campus. which was it's an interesting experience, especially for me who like to be obedient and follow rules. And now you're in a place where there are rules in place, but who's watching, right? And so, you also hear a lot of messages around like college being the place where you find your lifelong friends, being a place where you find out who you are. So I got there and I was like, where is it? Where are these friends? Where are these me that I'm supposed to be finding? And not really realizing that, no, you're supposed to develop that. You develop into that. You develop friendships. You develop an interest in your career. You develop a sense of self. It's not just sitting there waiting for you to just happen to college, right? And it took me, I think, all of my undergraduate years to learn that. It took me, maybe it was just, it's my process, but that was my journey, right? It took me time to figure that out. And I would say my first year was just kind of like sticking to my group, I was fortunate enough to be roommates with someone who I known from the community my first year. So we just kind of stayed in our bubble. And second year expanded that bubble a little bit. And I started to realize that, a lot of the things that I'm doing does not feel congruent with who I am, There is no mom here to tell you what to do. And even if she was here, I don't think I necessarily agree with the things that she's telling me to do, right? And so I had to allow myself to explore who I am and do it in a way that was unapologetic, which requires a lot, because if we know anything about Nigerians, we're judgmental, right? we're judgmental about everything, and especially when we know that we are all going back to the same community, right? And so you want to stay phased. You don't want this person telling their mom and their mom tell your mom. And so it took some time for me to get to a place where I just felt like I'm going to do what I want and allow myself to make those mistakes. And if it happens, and I'll deal with it then. But again, it took 3.5 years for me to get there. And my senior year, I got there.
Oh, wow. That's great.
I got there. That's great. There, but it takes some time.
So were you mostly among the African immigrant student or African children of first generation or second generation, or were you intermingling with African American, the white population, and all these other different groups in college?
So my first 3 years, I stayed with my people, right? Because that's what I know. That was what feels familiar to me. And I almost felt like I shut down opportunities that didn't feel like that was related to like Nigerians or other Africans. My first and second year, I mostly stayed with Nigerians, Chicago Nigerians, let's be specific. So mostly stayed with Chicago Nigerians. And about my third year, I started to mix with other Africans, mostly like French-speaking Africans. So my friends were from Cameroon specifically. And trying to connect with people on that level. And I think at that point, I also started to have more, the class sizes get smaller. I was also doing some research in the counseling department. So I had some experience with some folks who were, white. I should also say, like, earlier on, I had some African American friends in my circle as well, but didn't feel as close with them. Again, because, the idea is that I wanted to be friends with people who understood me without me trying to explain who I am, right? People who understand when I say my mom wouldn't like if I did this, I'm thinking about my siblings, people who would understand without me having to explain it. And so I pretty much stuck to my group. And I think by my third year, I realized that also wasn't working for me, right? Because I was still navigating life within boundaries of expectations of what other people had of me. And I would say, like, my final year, actually, a lot of self-disclosure, I actually decided I wanted to live by myself so that I can allow myself, I want to be intentional about exploring my identity, exploring the things that I want out of life, exploring the kind of relationships that I wanted to be in, both in terms of friendships and romantic relationships. And I did move by myself, and I felt like I was able to be me, and I actually met my husband then. So it worked out for me.
It worked out very well. That is really good, because one thing I always, tend to tell so many of our youth and young men and women, that in college, like you said, is where you navigate through your social life and prepare you for corporate world, whatever you want to, call it, adult life and everything. Because, we might talk about issue of race and social injustice and discrimination, glass ceiling as a person of color, but you still have to work with other group of people. from different places. You have to work with African American, Caribbean, Asian, white. You have to work with different people. And then if you are not learning all those things in college, you are not navigating through all those different space in college, you could actually affect you sometimes, because in terms of even building connection with, other people as well.
Yeah, and I think the kind of message that I got, and I am a lot of my friends got, is like, you're going to college to continue school, not to learn about life, right? That part isn't emphasized. And so the heavy attention is placed in the academic piece, right? And then young folks get to college and they're like, whoa, there's this other piece that I wasn't prepared for. I worked in the University Counseling Center for some time. And you see that where, especially Nigerian youths or African youths or other immigrant youths, they come in, they're like, this, I wasn't expecting this. I'm not prepared to deal with this. And my parents don't know how to deal with this. So I can't even ask them, because what they tell me is focus on school. But I can't focus on school if I'm lonely, if I'm depressed, if I don't have friends, if I don't have a partner and I want a partner, if I feel like I have low self-esteem. All of that is affecting my studies. And my parents are telling me to just ignore that part. Or if I pray hard enough, all of those parts wouldn't matter. So young folks are, and they call that period emerging adulthood, right? So it's not like after college, you're an adult.
Yeah.
And so I think that's one thing that we can emphasize, like, this is not the part that prepares you for adult. It helps you start the journey to adulthood, but we are not expecting that once you graduate, you're ready to fly.
Yeah.
Some people are, but that's not it.
Yeah, you just went into the next, the question I was thinking, because how does the social life in college affect, the mental health and emotional development of the student? Yeah. Because if you are in college whereby even you might be so smart that you think you want to go and study medicine and everything, you could do it on your own. But socially, emotionally, you bankrupt, it would be difficult to follow through that task. And that's what many African immigrant parents don't understand. Even some of the ones that I've come across, I always, advise them, as you are in college, you integrate yourself. And if you need help, go to the counseling center, talk to a therapist, talk to somebody. There's nothing wrong. No, your parents are not therapists. They are your parents.
Well, and the parents will say, I'm your mother, I'm your father. Why can't you talk to me? And I hear that sentiment a lot with clients. My parents just say, why can't I talk to them? And there's a reason why you can't talk to them like that, because they're your parents and they know you very well, or they think they know you very well. They so there's some things that you can't share out loud with them that it's beneficial to talk to a therapist about.
That's true. And how do you think your strict African background affect the way you interact with professors and challenge ideas?
You don't. You don't. I actually remember many experiences. I think it was my second year. And I'm thankful for all the people that were around me, my professors, and that saw something in me and actually told me to do something, and being obedient, I did it. And that's where I am. So I remember being in class one day, and the professor had her graduate students come into class, and they were recruiting for research assistants. And they're like, is anybody interested? As usual, I don't say anything, I just keep my mouth shut. And my professor said, well, Latifah, I think you'd be good for it. I was like, oh, really? Okay, I'll do it. And almost doing it like in an obedient way. And, the people that I worked with, and they were so great. They're so supportive. The work that I did then was instrumental in me getting into graduate school and doing the kind of work that I'm doing now. But I think that certainly influenced just my ability to be assertive, my ability to be transparent, because, and I know a lot of my Nigerian friends that still do this, a lot of like hiding, always putting on your best foot forward. You want to show up as your best self. We don't know how to be transparent. We don't know how to be authentic. And a lot of our interactions are hidden under layers of masks.
Yes.
Right. And you can't connect with people that way. people feel a disconnect from you. People kind of feel like something is off. People don't enjoy the conversation with you, or you only have superficial relationships.
Yes.
And so, you know, I a lot of people that I know that I went to college with that were not Nigerians, I have much deeper relationships with them now than the way that I was interacting with them when I was in college. And so I think that, you know, it's still something that I think a lot of us have to work on, is just like being able to show up as ourselves versus, and we're raised to always put your best foot forward. You don't tell people your problems. You, even if you don't know it, you don't say that you don't know it. You just like you perform. Right.
It's so true what you said, and that comes from home. That is part of, I won't even say it's part of the culture, because some things just change in the way we view life, the way we view things. If you go back into storytelling, the idea of traditional storytelling, or the proverbs never tell you not to actually, you know, bring forth yourself. Always, you know, indicate the truth about yourself. But we develop this kind of value system later on, whereby we feel like we have to put out a front for everything. And we're so much in competition with each other.
Yes.
To the extent that we are not even being truthful about who we are, who our children are. You know, if you do something today, I'm going to overdo you tomorrow.
Yes. Yes.
You know, and that's part of the pressure we put on ourselves, on our children. If somebody buys a house and they cannot afford it, and I'm going to buy something bigger than yours.
Yes. I mean, you even hear in the sentiments, we always joke about, you know, if you tell your parents you got a B, and they tell you the person who they got an A, do they have two heads? You know, it just, even in that simple comment.
Yes, in those, and sometimes some people think it's, sometimes you could look at it as a positive aspect of it, and a form of motivation. But it might be other things as well, that, you know, to tell you that whatever you have, be satisfied with it. It is okay. Failure is an option.
Yeah. And you can be friends with a person who have an A and be person who have a B, and that's okay.
Yeah, that's okay. Some, you know, to the extent, you know, that we don't believe that, okay, if something doesn't work out, if any failure, that means everything is done.
Yes.
And I always tell people that, you know, the people who produce, you know, car makers, you know, engineers and all these other people, they have to test different level of things before they make it perfect. Even you are in research, there's so many things that you have to do. There's sometimes that there's some studies that, you know, it didn't turn out the way you want it to, you know, you expect for it to turn out. And then you have to start all over again. So it's part of human nature that it's okay if things don't go the way somebody expects.
Yeah. And it can't. Like, you've never tried this before, so why do you think you're going to get it right on the first time?
Yes. you know, you are so right about that. You are so right about. So when we're talking about this regarding your identity as a child of African immigrant, and as a Black person in this country, you know, who is a person of color, how do you consider your identity to be? Do you call yourself Nigerian American?
I'm laughing because my research team is doing a project where we ask people that same question, and I haven't thought to ask myself that question.
Oh wow!
But I would say I am Nigerian, as someone who was raised in Nigeria, and I've lived in Chicago since I was 10. And I think that gives a lot of context to it, right? It says, you know, in college, I remember people often having this conversation around like, oh, you're Americanized, and it was like seen as a deficit, right? You're not really Nigerian. And so I see myself as someone who was born in Nigeria, raised in Nigeria, and moved here and continued to be raised in America. I feel like a lot of my my value systems, like the core of it, is very Nigerian in nature. You know, the value of respect, the value of religion and spirituality, the value of family. I think all of those are the same. How I manifest that is, I think, can be very Americanized, right? And so an example is, I think it's important to, you know, have a core family. I think it's important to have a relationship with family members. Family is very important to me. That's the Nigerian piece, right? The American piece, I think, is important to have respect in those relationships. I think it's important to have healthy in that relationship, right? Not just be in a relationship with someone because they're family, but have a healthy relationship, a mutually respectful relationship. And so I think the core pieces are very rooted in Nigerian values, but how I manifest those in behaviors, I think they're very much rooted in American principles.
Oh, okay, that's good. And those principles is also, all over the world anyway.
Yes.
Family values,
Yes.
One thing that I really appreciate in this country is that just because, you're a family member and you bring in a lot of issue, you being detrimental to another person or using another person to benefit yourself, they're easy to cut you off and say, you know what, I cannot continue with this.
Yeah. I remember when I first heard that, I was like, what? You can do that?
Yeah.
You can just choose to not talk to a family member? Yeah,
just to not talk to the parent, because you try your best, you did everything you could, and it's as if you are just dumping everything on the ground and you are not appreciating what that person, and they're willing to move on and say, okay, I cannot, because of your decision of what you want to do or choices you're making, how is that also affecting me as a person? And they learn to move on.
Yeah.
Whether you're talking about in marriages or, siblings or any other, family relation, So.
Yeah. And we've been thinking about the idea of the value of respect, right? Both, both societies, both Nigerian and American, has place high value and respect. But what does that look like? Respect, in, at least from my experience in Nigeria, growing up in a Nigerian household, is you don't talk back, you don't challenge authority, you do as I say, even if what I say is wrong. Well, what I say is not wrong because it's never wrong, but you do as I say, right? Well, here is my respect for you is like gently challenging you, being transparent about how I feel about what you just said, been telling you when I don't agree with you, and that's seen as I respect you enough to tell you the truth, versus I respect you enough to not argue with you.
Yes, I'm so glad that you differentiate between both. I'm so glad that you differentiate, because if you have to tell me that what I'm doing is wrong, is actually challenging me to look within myself.
Yes. Yeah.
And as an adult, I'm not ready to do that. Or even as a professional, I don't know whether you're talking to many Nigerians who, you guys have PhD, your level of thinking is different. From meeting a Nigerian PhD who grew up back in Nigeria, came to this country, or have that level of education in Nigeria, whereby you challenge them and they look at you that, who are you to tell me anything? Do you know my qualification?
Right.
Do you know what I have? So a lot of all those things, do happen, with members of our community. So it's actually to bring that in and let you know that, what, I'm still respectful. I'm just letting you know that whatever it is that you said, whatever decision that you make, or what you are telling me now, I'm now telling you that is completely wrong.
Yep. Yeah, even within like parent-child relationship, I was looking on Twitter and one of my friends had tweeted something about like she was on a Zoom call, and sorry for telling your personal information if you're listening to this, but she was saying that she was on a Zoom call and she told her daughter like, hey, could you be quiet? I'm on a Zoom call. And the daughter, I think she's like less than 5 years old, she said, but I wasn't talking to you, so why do I have to be quiet? And some people's comments on Twitter were like, oh, she needs harsh punishment, take away her free time. And it was like, she's 5. She's asking you, if I'm not talking to you, why do I need to be quiet? She's like genuinely asking. But, from the Nigerian framework, oh, that's disrespectful. That's talking back. When I tell you to be quiet, you just be quiet. You don't say anything back. So I think just thinking about those things from that perspective.
It's very important, because at least the mother explained to her why she needed her to be quiet. And the child will understand that this is the reason why I needed to be quiet.
And because of that, she can apply it to future situations, right? Yes. Versus just be quiet when I tell you to. No, I don't really know when I'm supposed to be quiet, when I'm not supposed to be quiet. And some children will say, when I talk about like developing identity, oh, I don't even know when I'm supposed to be quiet or not, so I'm just going to stop talking, right? And some children are like, well, you can't figure out when you want me to be quiet, so I'm just going to keep talking. And that's a child that gets into trouble all the time versus the child that gets quiet, gets depressed, gets alone, and all those other kind of like internalized problems.
Yeah, that is so true. You are so good at this. I'm telling you.
Oh, thank you.
We need many people like you in your field to actually educate members of our community regarding all this conversation. So let me now get into your doctorate program in mental health as a practitioner and as a professor yourself. So what inspired you to focus more on area of racial and ethnic minority, immigrants' mental health, and Black immigrants' cultural experiences as well?
Yeah, I think the first thing is just based on my own experiences, wanting to understand my experience and not really having any kind of literature that supports it, right? And so that helped me to notice that, okay, there's a whole world of a whole kind of people out here that this things that I'm reading about in class does not apply to, or the way that we apply to it looks very different. So not just really wanting one's research on my population of interest, research on people that look like me, but also realizing that enough of us need to be out there doing the work. You know, a white person can study cultural experiences of minority folks, right? But the way that they understand it will be different based on their lived experiences. Also, only 3% of about 3% of psychologists are Black, not let alone like African or Caribbean, right? So 3%, right? And think about, you know, we are encouraging folks to seek therapy. Well, what are the chances that if you go out to look for a therapist, you're going to find someone that looks like me or someone that's like me? Because we know, you know, connection is just it's not just a matter of representation, but actually fully understanding, right? Without me having to explain all of me, like fully understanding. And so that was really the motivation behind me looking to go into grad school for my master's degree. And at that point, I was working at a hospital, and I remember a South African young adolescent was admitted. And I remember talking to her, and part of her distress was just like, she wanted to stay in the hospital because people understood her in the hospital. Her parents didn't understand her. They were South African, and they didn't quite understand what was going on. She was about 13 years old, and at that point, she was hospitalized for suicidal thoughts. And they were just kind of like, stop all this that you're doing. Why are you doing this? And she got in trouble for sharing her suicide thoughts with her counselor, which led her to be admitted, right? So that she was being punished for seeking help by her parents. And so I thought, and you know, where I worked, I think I was the only Black clinician there. And a lot of people just like, oh, the parents are terrible. How dare they? Do we report them? And it was like, no. This is like, there's a context to this, right? Because now you're even doing more damage to her. There was a lack of understanding of the parents' culture and the child's culture. And so I think at that point, it's a matter of education versus punishing. And so it better helped me to highlight the need for me and people that look like me in these particular settings. And so that's how I kind of developed this idea that I needed to do more. And one way to do more is to do research. One way to do more is to be the person training other clinicians, right? So in a teaching role and in a supervision role.
Oh my God, that's so profound story that you just told. And it's so common within our community, whereby many of the children are going through a lot of mental health issue, emotional health issue, and the parents don't know how to navigate. Is either they take the child to a religious leader or other member of the community or some adult that they think could talk to that child, and
or send them back to Nigeria. That will fix it.
I've heard the story of a mother who sent an autistic child to Nigeria, teenager to Nigeria, and said, you know, they will deal with him there, because she felt like if he goes through enough discipline and some kind of hardship, that will be able to bring him back to normalize to bring him back to normalcy, according to our own belief. And that is so sad. So you are not just a clinical psychologist, you're also a professor as well. So has that been, you know, for you in terms of, you know, into the academics?
Yeah, I love it. It's what I've always wanted to do since I got into the field of psychology. So I teach in the doctoral program. So my students are mostly doctoral students. They're also getting their PhD in psychology.
Okay.
And sometimes I have classes with master students who are trained as like master's level clinician.
Mhm.
One of the things that I enjoy about it is like training students to be culturally competent in the work that they do. One of my favorite parts is just training them to have conversations, be comfortable asking conversations about race, right? These are things that be comfortable asking, having conversations about cultural differences, individual differences, especially because we are typically raised to not talk about those kinds of things, right? They're taboo in the American society. And we know that in working with clients from minority backgrounds, you have to talk about this because this is part of their daily experiences,
Mhm.
especially when it's relevant to what brings the person to counseling.
Mhm.
We have to talk about it. So I enjoy training and working with students to try to figure out how they can, have this conversation. The other key piece is that it requires a lot of self-reflection. The line of work that we do requires a lot of, introspection, a lot, and it's been self-serving. My line of work has been self-serving because it's required me to talk to reflect on some of my own experiences, right? So
Mhm.
it's self-serving that I have to heal in order for me to help someone else, right? One of my clinical orientation is the use of transparency and authenticity, right? So like when I'm talking to someone and I'm having a reaction, I've learned to trust my reaction and share with that person, like, hey, what you're saying, it's making me feel some kind of way. Can we talk about it? In order for me to be able to say that, I have to be able to trust my own gut, right? And I have to be able to trust that I have good intentions. I'm not coming in from a place where I'm focused on my own suffering, right? It's not just my stuff coming up.
Mhm.
And so I like that it allows me to work on my own stuff and helping students to work on their own stuff because we all have stuff,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
We all have stuff. We all carry it with us, but we need to be aware of it so that we can attend to it appropriately.
So, so I wanted to ask you, do you, as a therapist, do you focus your practice in terms of, do you also do diagnosis as well of mental
So
health issue as a therapist?
yeah, so typically therapists are trained to give diagnosis. So
Mhm.
there are multiple ways that you can do diagnosis. We have what do I call it? Treatment Bible, so to speak, called the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. It
Yeah.
tells us that if the person is presenting with XYZ symptoms, then they likely meet the criteria for XYZ diagnosis, whether it's depression, anxiety, psychosis. So it tells us. So I am trained to observe the person's behaviors or inquire about the person's behaviors to specify a diagnosis. The other part of my training is to give psychological assessments that require some analysis to figure out if the person needs a specific diagnosis. So sometimes it's hard to give a diagnosis because the person's behaviors look like X, kind of looks like Y, but we really need to figure out what it is so we can treat it appropriately.
Yeah.
So we give a series of psychological instruments that will help to
Mhm.
narrow down the diagnosis.
Yes. And then, when you're dealing with younger children, maybe somebody below 18, whereby maybe do you also interview the parents about what they've seen in the child's behavior, whereby they could have a contribution into making the appropriate diagnosis?
Absolutely. That's an essential part of treating anyone who's underaged. You also have to consider the relationship between the parents and the child.
Mhm.
And because there's a statute of confidentiality, you can't share everything that you talk to with the child or young adolescent with the parent.
Mhm.
Sometimes you have parents who are not cooperative, right? And depending on the state that you're living in, the child or adolescent is entitled to a certain amount of sessions without the consent of the parent.
Mhm.
After a certain amount of sessions, then the parents have to be involved for the person to continue to receive services. So in those cases, a lot of what I do in those in Illinois, 6 sessions, um, or at one point it was 6 sessions. I don't know what it is now, but a lot of what I do in those earlier sessions is work on how do we bring the parents in. What
Mhm.
can we share with them? How do we want to phrase it to them
Mhm.
just so that they can sign up on you receiving sound services? Whether it's like, I just want to go somewhere to talk about my feelings.
Mhm.
And sometimes I'm happy to be a part of that conversation.
Mhm.
I've certainly worked with children whose parents are like, I don't understand what you're doing, but just go ahead and do it. I'm like, okay, great. It's like sometimes I need you on board, especially when you're working with children. It's really like parents training, right? A lot of what the child, especially under 12, a lot of what the child does is based on the parents. So a lot of it really is teaching the parents how to parent the child. And so when the parents don't want to be involved, it makes it really, really difficult, because part of it means that you're telling them what you're doing is not working and you need to do something else. And they don't want to hear that.
Yeah, that is so true. And only when people have that awareness that you could make the changes and they're willing to work with therapists as well as work with the child, that they could see that they could, make the changes. So since we've been diving into this conversation of mental health, some people may not understand, Dr. Cabirou. Can you define to those who may listen to this podcast, what is mental health and what is mental illness?
Yes. So loosely put, everyone has mental health, right? Just like everyone has physical health. Mental health is basically the status of your psychology, the status of your mind. How healthy or unhealthy are you mentally? Mentally being, how are you functioning in terms of your thoughts, your emotions, because we all have emotions. We all experience several ranges of emotions, from sadness to depression to anxiety to nervousness to worry to what a lot of, I hear Nigerian adults saying like scared or nervous. We have different words for it, but we all experience different ranges of emotions. Mental illness comes into play when we talk about how our mind and our emotions impair our functioning, right? Mm-hmm. And everyone has different level of impairment, right? There's certain level of impairment where you're impaired, but you can still function. Mm-hmm. When your functioning starts to be impaired, whereas you're not, it's disrupting your daily life, then we're talking about potential for mental illness. We're talking about you're not functioning at your best because you're sad more days than not, because you're nervous. And when you get nervous right before a test, you fail the test. When you get nervous, you tend to just shut down and you can't function, or you just cry uncontrollably, or something activates something in you and you get aggressive, you get upset, you start yelling, you can't control it. All of those things that impair our function, impairs our relationship, that's when we're starting to talk about, this idea of psychopathology or mental illness. So different folks have different threshold, right? There is not a sense of like, once you cross this line, that's it. It's all subjective, which is, I think, is what makes it difficult for people to get on board with the idea of receiving mental health services, because they think it's not bad enough. Like, I'm alive, I'm still walking. Yes, but could you walk better? Right? Could you think better? Could you run better? Could your relationships be healthier? Could your relationship with yourself be healthier? So as opposed to thinking about it in terms of like, how bad am I? I like for people to think of it of how well am I?
Yeah.
Right? How well am I?
Yeah. And that brought me to the next question in terms of, when do you think is the right time to seek mental health services for a child, even for the parent or member of the community?
Whenever you're concerned. Okay. Whenever you're concerned. I think that, well, for one, we can all benefit from therapy, right? Therapy is not just a place to address problems. Therapy is a space for you to discover yourself, explore yourself, just even explore how your values became your values. I think with more insight that we have about ourselves and the things that we do, we can be more intentional in our daily activities, right? Understanding how your childhood experiences are contributing to the kind of relationships you are in now. I think it's very important. So we can all benefit from therapy. I always say, if you've never tried therapy before, try it. I mean, you don't wait till you break your leg before you go to a doctor's appointment, right? You have your regular physical checkup just to tell you like, yep, you're good. It never hurts to do, to try with therapy. Brief therapy sessions can be as brief as 6 sessions, right? As I always encourage it, especially when people have different life transitions. And so as you're preparing to go to college, as adolescents navigating social spaces, as you're graduating from college to the real world, right? All those significant developmental milestones they shake us up a bit, right? No matter how prepared we are, they shake us up a bit. So I always think those are pivotal times for people to go in counseling, get reacquainted with themselves. In terms of like maladaptive behavior, if there's a problem that you want to address, the minute you're concerned, it never hurts to go help. I know that, yeah, sometimes it hurts our pockets, right? There are costs associated with it, especially if you don't have insurance. But if you have the means, a lot of people don't even know whether their insurance cover mental health services or not. But when you start becoming concerned, as opposed to saying, let me wait to see how much worse it gets, once the concern come up for you, go check it out. Go get it assessed.
And you will find some people who will tell you that, like we talked about before, just pray about it. Everything will go away. Or talk to your pastor or imam. Let's pray about all these things, whatever you're feeling. Or maybe sometimes downplay your suffering and of a child or even adult themselves, that whereby you reassess yourself that why am I, worrying about this? I have a house, I have shelter, I have a job. I'm not physically healed. There's some people in some third world country who are going through so many things. So what is the point of me,
so invalidating?
Yeah, you invalidate yourself. Or rather, a child who comes to you and saying, I'm going through a lot of emotional distress. Or you see it, or the school guidance counselor called you and tell you that this child, this is the behavior that they're saying, that they think by that child going for therapy would be better. And you are looking at and say, well, I don't see any problem in her. She has food, he has all these other things that every human could function with. So what is the problem?
Yeah, I think we can think about it over multiple perspectives. If we think about it in terms of like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? There are 5 stages, and the first stage being like security, physical safety, right? And you have food. A lot of our folks think once you have that, you should be good. But that's actually, according to Maslow, the most basic of needs. There are 4 more steps before we get to actual self-actualization. Self-actualization, feeling like you're, fully into yourself, right? And so when we focus on those basic needs, we're basically saying like, as long as you have food, water, and security, you're good. But we know that that's not reality. Our body, our mind is telling us that that's not reality, yet we're fighting it. Sometimes we fight it because we don't know how else. We don't have the tools to deal with the reality that our life is not what we want it to be. And that's where a therapist can come into play. You don't have to deal with it on your own, right? There are support services in place for that. The other piece is that a lot of these mental health conditions have genetic contributions, right? And so where if a parent or a grandparent has it, the child is more likely to have it. And so parents have to also acknowledge that like some of their genetic contributions are also playing a role in it. This environmental contributions also play a role in it. The child lives in a home where mom and dad are fighting all the time, right? Or, and they think that, well, that's none of your business. They out of adult conversation. Well, the child is hearing it. And we know that all of this impacts how the child sees life, how they understand relationship. Think about patterns of generational trauma. You witness domestic violence in your household, and now you're married to someone who beats you, right? And you've been raised to think that that's what love is. That's what partners do. That's part of life, right? What our children are exposed to influences what they know to be true, right? And so there's a genetic component to it and the environmental component to it. And a lot of our parents and grandparents have not acknowledged their own mental health challenges, let alone be able to think about the fact that their child could have, acquired this illness or disease. When it comes to, the pastors and imams, certainly those spiritual and religious components, especially if you're a religious and spiritual person, those components are important to mental health, right? But it doesn't have to be all of it, right? It's one piece of it. And we also find that sometimes it discourages people from seeking out mental health services, but also from attending to their mental health, because it's this idea that, well, as God wills it. And it's a sense of learned helplessness. Well, I can't do anything about it because this is what God has destined for me. When, well, you haven't tried all of your resources. You talk to the imam, you talk to the priest, as a matter of fact, you see people going to different religious religious leaders because the
Leaders,
pastor said this, the imam said this. Okay, now let me try this one. You're exhausting all those needs, which is great, but you're only focusing on one component of health, right? The spiritual religious component. There are the other components of health that contributes to your well-being. And so I think we owe it to ourselves to fully attend to the whole of ourselves. I remember I gave a talk once at a religious space, and later on, I overheard and was told about people who talked about how like they had suicidal ideations, right? And it was like, wow. And after my talk was when they realized that they were actually, it was a common experience. And they had kind of normalized it because they weren't talking about it, right? So they thought like, okay, this must what everyone else must be feeling like. It's like, no, that's not a normal experience. I mean, to question life and death is one thing, but to have thoughts about what it would be like if I were not here and I would want to kill myself, that's something else. And so I think sometimes that inhibits us from even like fully realizing that we could use some support.
I remember you remind me of one event that I held in the community here, and we're talking about mental health. And one of the young ladies talk about, societal ideation, even societal in African society. And this father got up, he said, wow, Africans don't commit suicide like that. And I had to tell him, I said, just because you grew up in a society that does not label it as being suicide, there's so many people that they die, you don't even know what they died of. And nobody did any autopsy to find out that what did this person died of. I said, compared to here, you just don't drop dead like that. And then you don't know whoever poisoned themselves or do some other things that, took their own life. You just don't know. So we cannot dismiss that in African society, they don't do that. And that brought me to this question, maybe if you could relate how mental health and physical health also relate together.
They're certainly connected. Even in the list of diagnosis, right? There are some mental health conditions that are exacerbated by physical health. So like you may be someone who maybe feel occasional sadness, and then there's some physical illnesses that come up that exacerbates it, whether it's like chronic diagnosis or terminal diagnosis like cancer, or you're finding that you have diabetes and your leg needs to be amputated, or all those things. They can exacerbate one's feelings of sadness, anxiety, not wanting to be alive anymore, feeling like life is hopeless. And sometimes mental health can also exacerbate physical illness or even manifest itself as a physical presentation. So a lot of people, and I hear this often, oh, I have chest pain. Many times chest pains are symptoms of anxiety, right? Your heart palpitations when you're anxious, when you're nervous, right? Your heart palpitation increases and your chest hurt. But if you think about like, how am I feeling? If we're able to label our emotions, a lot of times it's nervousness, anxiety, right? Worry. And when you think about people who are worried about their bills, people who are just worried about life in general, a common thing that we hear is, I can't sleep at night. I stay up all night, or I keep waking up. A lot of the times that's anxiety related. A lot of times it's depression related, but we're not really listening to our body and our mind to label those emotions. We just say like, I can't sleep. Well, and then when you get to talk to them, like when you can't sleep, what are you doing? What thoughts are coming up for you? Oh, nothing. No, let's really think about it. When as long as you're awake, you're thinking about something. So let's like really examine those thoughts. You have people keep a journal of what they're thinking about and what keeps them up at night. And a lot of this is anxiety related and depression related. You have people talking about migraines. Racing thoughts can do that, right? Feeling nervous all the time can do that. You see people who are gaining weight and they're like, oh, but I eat very well. I've stopped eating past a certain time, but I'm still gaining weight. Depression can manifest. One of the symptoms of depression is loss of appetite or drastically increased appetite, right? And so a lot of our mental health conditions are also connected to like the neurotransmitters in our brain, which either slows down or speeds up a lot of our body processes, right? So they manifest themselves physically, but it all has significant mental health contributions. So all those sleep deficits, appetite, weight loss, chest pains, headache, physical pain, all of that can be connected to mental health. Now we actually see a lot of mental health interventions being used in medical spaces, When we think about clients who have chronic pain, we use a lot of mindfulness to help them manage their pains, right? And so they're very, very much connected. So we can't attend to one without the other.
The other, which is that's so powerful what you just said, and people need to listen to that as well, because if you are sick physically, you will run to the doctor right away.
Yeah.
But when you are not understanding that sometimes your mental health has something to do with your physical health also,
Yes.
that it has to be addressed, and it has to be addressed by a professional, not some cousins or some aunties or uncles or religious leader who actually help you fully with that, even though it might be a little bit of help, but they cannot actually fully help you with that without seeking professional help,
Yes.
to be able to do that.
And if you allow me to illustrate how it may look like for someone who, because sometimes people are expecting I'll know when it's going to happen. I will know if it's going to cross the line. And it could be as simple as you're constantly awake, right? You can't go to sleep. You're not getting good sleep because you can't fall asleep or you keep waking up. And so you're already operating on maybe 3 to 4 hours of solid sleep. Your body is not fully rested. Your mind is not fully rested, right? And so now you're after, a few weeks or months, you have a significant sleep debt, right? Your medical doctor can diagnose that. But what that means is that your cognitive processes are slower. You're not as sharp in decision making. You're more irritable. You're more agitated. You don't have energy to cook good food. So now you're eating out, right? And now you're, eating fast food. So now you're contributing, you're having, bad food in your system, right? And you're yelling at the people around you. You're ignoring people, you're dismissing them, you're taking your anger out on them. And now your friends don't want to talk to you, your family members don't want to talk to you. Now you're lonely because people aren't answering your call, right? And now your depression is it feeds your depression. Now you really can't sleep at night anymore. You're getting less and less hours of sleep. You go to drive a car because your cognitive processes aren't as sharp. Your body is physically tired. Your eyes are tired. You get into a car accident. Or hypertension, or we're talking about stroke after days and days of not sleeping well, chest pain, constant chest pain, you take medication for it, it doesn't help, you increase your dose. And so there are just many pathways in which mental illness or lack of attending to your mental health kills us slowly. And because it's not like a 1 + 1 = 2, we don't attend to it, right? We miss all those little signals that we should, just changing one thing can help along. It can go a long way.
Even though we talk about, the white community, that they have much more therapists in place than you ever think of Black community or African immigrant community, is because to me, they understand it and they accept it.
It's more accepted versus compared to our community, for sure.
For sure. So if they're much more accepted, if mommy, daddy, all the children have therapists, they're talking to therapists all the time. It's part of their package every day, every week, that they have to see somebody. So maybe when we start becoming much more aware of it, and bring this open discussion and educate people that this is important. It does not diminish who you are, and normalize it and say it is okay to seek help when it's needed, so that you could be a productive citizen and achieve those goals that you are capable of achieving. Because without that, you won't be able to get to where, the ancestor or the God or whatever you believe in have intention of you going there.
Yeah. And I even say beyond get help if you need it, if you want it. When I talk to my friends now, and sometimes I'm like, you just get a therapist, and I try to normalize it as much as possible. Just if you feel like you want to talk about this, just go to a therapist. You don't have to wait till you need it, because everyone's waiting for that threshold of need, and they keep waiting and waiting and waiting. And from a brief study that I did, most people don't realize there's a need until it becomes life-threatening, right? And at that point, you're wanting a therapist to fix things like that, and it takes time, right? It takes a lot of time.
So what do you think are the most common stigma among African immigrant community, also, African American as well, community, when it comes to seeking help for mental health?
Therapy is a white people thing. Therapy is for the weak. What is a therapist going to tell me that I can't tell myself? they can't solve my problem. They don't understand me, so they can't solve my problem. I'm the one who understands how I work. I'm one, or I know what I need to do. And especially when the matters are outside of the person's control, it becomes, I just need to work harder. A therapist is not going to help me get a job. A therapist is not going to help me get more money. So why would I even go to a therapist? Not realizing that, yeah, a therapist can't give you a job, but one, they can teach you interview skills. Two, they can give you some feedback about your interactions with people, because you say you keep interviewing, no one's offering you a job at the interviews. Not only how you respond to interview questions, because you could be smart, you can be brilliant, but if people can't connect to you, if you're given a vibe of arrogance, if you're keeping conversations superficial, yeah, you may be brilliant, but no one wants to work with people who they can't talk to.
They can't talk
and
to.
So, yeah.
Yeah. You said you previously work in mental health hospital. Can you talk about the psychiatric hospitalization and the unfair stigma people projected on being admitted to the hospital?
Yeah.
Whereby, they view you going to any regular hospital differently than going to the psychiatric hospital. They have this negative stigma. Oh, he's in, like in New York here, that person is in Bellevue, and all that stuff. This negative stigma actually prevent a lot of people. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I want to start by saying that it's likely culture specific, so I can only speak to the experiences of hospitalization in the U.S. Because actually, when I was in Nigeria this December, my dad and I, took a drive by the psychiatric hospital in Abeokuta, and it's a really large facility. So I wonder, like, the criteria for being admitted there. But in the U.S., you can only be hospitalized in an inpatient facility if there is imminent threat to yourself or to someone else. Now, imminent means that if you are not being monitored 24/7, chances are you would hurt or kill yourself, or hurt or kill someone else. Those are in the cases of suicidal ideation. So if just because you're having suicide thoughts doesn't mean we're gonna hospitalize you. We're gonna check to see, like, can you keep yourself safe? Is there someone else that can keep you safe? Are there other things that we can do so that you don't hurt yourself? Not just hurt yourself, so you don't kill yourself. If it's a no, then no, the hospital is likely where we would put you. There are also the cases of people who want to kill someone else. They're so angry, or they have thoughts about killing someone else that they feel like they can't control their thoughts. In those cases, it's best for us to hospitalize you to prevent homicide or murder. If the individual's level of functioning is so impaired that they can't distinguish, they're not attuned to reality, right? Whether they're having psychotic thoughts, they are having delusional thoughts, and these are more common than we think that they are. Because a person that can't, tell what's reality from what's delusions, then or hallucinations, it's best for us to keep them in the hospital. And typically, what happens in a hospital is you may be medicated to help decrease your level of acuity, right? That doesn't mean you have to be on the medication for forever. Typically, we like you to be on the medication for some time until you can see a therapist on an outpatient basis and can help you engage in behaviors where you feel like, to the point where you can manage it yourself. But typically, medication is indicated so that it can help you reduce that level of acuity. I do also have to say that, having worked in those settings, Black and Brown folks are typically hospitalized at a higher rate than they should be, given the clinical symptoms. Especially when I work with adolescents and children, a young Black child comes in, like, this child is aggressive, this child, can't control their emotions, let's hospitalize them. And so Black and Brown kids are typically seen as a threat to the community, not just themselves, but to the community. So sometimes they're unfairly hospitalized. So I don't want to push and encourage hospitalization without acknowledging that unfair treatment within the hospital system. After all, it's America. The racism runs deep across various institutions. But what I do like to say is that, it's important to at least get assessed, especially when we're thinking about keeping you alive or keeping other people alive. When I've been in the emergency room settings and I've seen Nigerians, or mostly Nigerians, but Africans come in, typically they are asking to not be hospitalized in the face of clear threats to themselves or other people. I had a woman tell me, this has been happening since I've been in Nigeria. So let me just go back to Nigeria where, they know what to do with me. And coming from her culture, I understand what she meant by that, wanting to go to an herbalist or whoever to help manage those symptoms. And, I say, when we think about it from like a biological standpoint, a medication can help. If you have psychosis symptoms, you probably need to be on medication for a really, really long time because your body's chemistry and biology is off. And not being on a medication, it may be hard for you to kind of like regulate your behaviors. So, I don't mean to go off on a tangent, but I think that it's specific to each individual, but you don't know what's going to work for you until you give it a shot. Honestly speaking, a lot of the times we as a therapist don't know what's going to work for you until we get to talk to you, not just one time, but across multiple sessions. There is no formula for managing depression. There is no formula for managing anxiety because it is our life experiences that contributes to those symptoms, right? And so we have to get to know you in order to be able to figure out what formula works for you. And so sometimes people go to therapy and they're like, I went for one session, it didn't work. Well, you've had like a lifetime to develop these ways of being, and you want me to figure it out in 45 minutes? I'm still just getting to know you. As a matter of fact, I still don't know you yet. So give it some time. Give it about 6 sessions before you bail on your therapist.
One thing I wanted to point out regarding Black and brown kids being much more admitted to the hospital than any other group. One thing I also see that they could be admitted, but they're easily discharged earlier without exploring the necessary care, or even after they're discharged from the hospital, the parents may not be educated about the medication. What, what are the side effects? How long does the medication supposed to work? How long does it take, to work, with the body chemistry? If the certain medication is not working, how can I come back to the psychiatrist and change the medication? How do I advocate for my child? And that comes from education of the community, because if I feel like, oh, they just want to pull in a Black and brown kids just for no reason, and not actually giving them the necessary equipment that they need. Because if you discharge them, they're not getting, which would lead me to the next question, actually towards the end, because we're almost, going over 1 hour with this conversation. If I don't, you come from a family whereby the education is not there on how to go through the process of treatment to make that person productive, member of the society, whereby they will actually function, whether they're suffering from psychosis, depression, any other thing that we're talking about, and they stop the treatment, and the symptoms end up coming back. So what are the side effects, or how am I going to say, what are the repercussion that comes from not seeking mental health issue? Can you talk about the drug, self-medication? When it has to do with using drugs as well as, seeking help for mental health?
Oh, that's a loaded question. So I want to preface my response by saying I'm not a psychiatrist, so a psychiatrist would be best suited to talk about the side effects of medication. However, the challenge is that, earlier on we talked about the connection of the mind and body, right? A lot of these psychotropic medications, the medication they give to you for mental health, to address mental health concerns, they have real life impact, right? In the way that they make you feel good, they're changing your body chemistry, right? They're influencing your body chemistry. So a lot of those medications are not one to be taken lightly, where you can just like stop taking it on your own. The side effects are real, right? And sometimes can be fatal. You can't just decide to stop taking a medication all of a sudden. Typically, if you're working with a psychiatrist to get you off the medication, they will never just stop it abruptly. They will always taper you down, right? And for some of them, they tell you, if you miss a dose, don't take 2 the next dose. Just go back to 1, because there are real life potentially fatal implications of it. So it's really important that if you're working with a psychiatrist or with a mental health professional, you adhere to your treatment. To your point, when a lot of folks are discharged from an inpatient hospital, you get a packet that tells you follow up, part of the discharge plan is typically like they tell you which therapist you should go to, follow up. A lot of folks don't follow up, right? And they discharge you with like maybe a handful of medication. You're supposed to follow up with someone so you can get a refill. You don't get the refill, and now your body changes. Behavioral also changes. Emotions also changes as a result of that. So it's very important to have follow-up care. You mentioned self-medication. Now, a lot of people use marijuana, cannabis, some form of street drugs to self-medicate as a way to make them feel good. I have my own personal thoughts about that based on my value systems. But I think that to a point, a lot of people self-medicate and it has some healing properties, right? But for example, a lot of people use marijuana to cope with depression or anxiety because it gives them an escape. For anxiety, it slows down their thoughts. But now you've become dependent on this. You're not engaging in any behavior changes that will actually lift the anxiety. Because what happens when that high wears off? You come back to reality. The problems are still there. The way that you're dealing with it is still there. So in terms of like long-term plan for medication for managing mental health concerns, if you're going to self-medicate, why not just go to a doctor or a psychiatrist so they can just give you the thing that will actually work for you that's controlled?
Some people may not, because they said marijuana is a gateway drug that leads to other drugs. Yes. You might take marijuana today, advance to cocaine or fentanyl,
yes,
which is very fatal. And people are not understanding that the impact of all these things in your daily function and all that stuff.
Yeah, and having worked in an inpatient unit and seen a lot of folks coming in where they thought they were just smoking weed and it was laced with something else and having some significant life-changing impact. You think you're buying weed, but what they gave you was something else. So I know my dealer wouldn't do that to me. By the time you realize it, it's too late.
It's too late, and the whole brain chemistry is already, changed one way or the other. So we have to talk about that in terms of, and some people self-medicate with food, they self-medicate with alcohol, not only drugs, and so many other things.
Or creating another problem on top of the problem you already have.
Shopping, buying things that you don't really need. A lot of all that things that people do to self-medicate themselves. So I know I've taken so long of your time.
No, I just want to say that all those things that you just named, shopping, food, drugs, alcohol, we all have our way of coping, right? So when done moderately or minimally, they could be effective coping strategies, right? Maybe you just need to escape for a day. That's okay. When it becomes habitual and a problem and it starts also impairing your functioning, if you're spending more time trying to shop as an escape, that's when that all becomes concerning.
Yeah. Thank you so much so knowing that seeking mental health care continues to be a taboo in African immigrant community, as a mental health practitioner, what advice would you have for the Africans in the diaspora dealing with mental illness or have family members who are diagnosed with mental illness, such as the way to tackle mental health issue earlier, compared so that they could live a normal life compared to waiting for a long time and let's pray about it kind of idea?
I would say my biggest thing would be connected to what I mentioned earlier about authenticity and transparency. Be honest with yourself, right? Let's take away all the facade and all the when we're making excuses for things or let me wait. Let's really think, am I really concerned? If I am concerned, then let's act, because otherwise by prolonging it, you're worsening the problems, right? I think of situations where a child is dealing with depression and the parent is saying, let me wait. The depression is not alleviating. It's getting worse, right? The way that a depressed person interacts with the world oftentimes feed the depression some more. And so be honest with yourself and ask yourself, am I genuinely concerned? If you're spending more time thinking about the situation, then you probably are concerned. And listen to that. Trust your intuition, trust your gut, and listen to that. And once you do that, get help. Or at least, worst case scenario, you show up to a therapist and the therapist is like, oh, you're good. There's nothing here. You're done, right? You can leave. They're not going to hold you if there's nothing to work on. A lot of folks also don't know where to go to seek help, right? And so to that, I always say, one, your doctor. You can always go to your doctor and just as a starting point of like, I need support. Just, I need mental health support, behavioral health support, whatever you want to call it, call your doctor and just ask them for recommendations. Two, I would say check with your insurance. Per law, all insurance policies are required to have some kind of behavioral health component. Now, it may not be affordable, but they're required to have some behavioral health components to it, right? So call them and ask them, even if it's not like, you know, where to go, but where is my starting point, so they can address it. On a personal note, I'm happy to help people get connected to services. People can email me for support. I provide therapy services within the state of Illinois. I'm still connected to Illinois, so you can reach out to me. I can connect you to one of my colleagues if I'm not available to see you, or if I know you too closely, I'm happy to connect you to someone else. But, you know, talk to your doctor, check with your insurance. Psychologytoday.com is a good avenue for seeking a provider. And then just like you do everything else, Google it. You Google everything else. You Google restaurants. You Google, you know, how to tie gele, how to put on, you know, eyebrow, you know, how to dance. Google it. We have these skills, so let's not just use it when it's convenient. Let's also use it for those difficult things too. And you will find that a lot of websites has like mental health assessments, like that can kind of give you an indication of whether you should try something or not. So you can try samhsa.org, SAMHSA.org. You know, it's a good it's the US government's division that attends to mental health stuff. So it can link into a lot of different sites that have tools that you can take to see, like, do I meet the criteria for depression? Do I meet the criteria for anxiety? And then by filling those out, it'll connect you to resources. And if you are a college student, your university has counseling services that you have paid for by through your student services payment. Don't let them tell you otherwise. Your school has a university counseling center that can provide you with services. So reach out to them. And they may have a long wait. They may tell you they can't see you for, you know, XYZ weeks, but check them out. It's free for you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Latifat. Thank you so much. So how can our listener connect with you online? Do you have a website or seek your professional help? I hope you're able to take patients all over United States.
So far, just Illinois. I'm working on the other pieces for Atlanta, for Georgia and Alabama. So far, Illinois. If you need to find me, you know what? You can send me an email. My email address is latifatocabirou@gmail.com. That's LATIF as in family, ATOCABIROU@gmail.com. You also check me out on Instagram, Dr. Cabirou, DRCABIROU on Instagram. I don't have my personal website, but the practice that I work with has a website, and it's called Olive Branch Counseling and Associates. It's in Tilling Park. So if you just Google Olive Branch Counseling and Associates, you'll find me there. I'm only providing services virtually right now. And so you can also just reach out to me for a consultation. I'm happy to just like have a 15-minute conversation with you about mental health. I do those often, especially for members of our community. So just reach out to me. I'm happy to get you connected to other folks. I'm happy to help you find providers within your insurance network. And I would say to you, I appreciate you for having this podcast to kind of like spread the word in our community. And, you know, whenever you need me, I am here. Whenever I am happy to connect you to other colleagues who can support you and your podcast.
Oh, wow.
And, you know, we've talked about like planning events for members of our community. And so I would say to you and folks around the nation that are doing similar work, let's all get together and let's do some things for our community.
Do something, yes. So Pansa Pansa is normalizing conversation about the importance of seeking professional therapy and counseling for members of our community when the need arises. As we publicly discuss difficult issues within our community, we are shedding away stigma that is associated with uncomfortable dialogue such as mental health and drug addiction. I really want to thank you, Dr. Latifat Cabirou, for this wealth of knowledge you brought to our audience today regarding the importance of seeking mental health care and disbanding the stigma that is associated with seeking mental health. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Pansa Pansa Live Podcast. We hope to have you back with us in the next episode as we continue to explore the nuances of the African immigrant experience. If you'd like to connect with us, you can email us at talk@pansapansa.org. That is talk@pansapansa.org. And follow us on Instagram at pansa.pansaforum. Until next time, remember to spread kindness and love. Thank you and take care of yourselves.